At 58, Keith Urban standing at this weird-ass intersection, worldwide fame on one side, and this surprisingly quiet personal life on the other. This ain't no story about scandal, headlines, or money drama. It's about what shifts after a long marriage ends and the whole everyday setup gets reset. Fame doesn't just vanish, but those old routines sure do. The noise dies down. What's left is straight-up adjustment, figuring out how days look when those familiar roles ain't there anymore. Before we dive deeper, this matters. If you dig clear, real stories without the hype, hit subscribe for verified deets and careful context on what actually changes behind the scenes when public success smacks in a private transition. Life before the split, structure, routine, identity. For many years, Keith Urban lived inside this super-structured personal setup shaped by marriage. His pro-life stayed demanding as hell, but it all spun around a shared center. Touring, recording, and public gigs were intense, yet they fit alongside a solid home routine that helped organize everything else. There was a clear split between work mode and personal time, and that divide made those long stretches away from home easier to handle. Marriage gave him predictability. Schedules got built with long-term plans in mind, factoring in school calendars, family events, and shared responsibilities. Even when work demands ramped up, the structure held tight. Travel had purpose, and coming home brought back that balance. That rhythm cut down friction and gave everyday life a sense of continuity, even under public pressure. Over time, that shared structure became part of his identity. Decisions got made with more than just career momentum in mind. Success was measured not only by charts or tour crowds, but by consistency, being there when it counted and keeping stability behind the scenes. That kind of normalcy builds up slow and often goes unnoticed while it's there. When a routine like that sticks around for years, it doesn't feel restrictive, man. It feels grounding. It becomes the reference point for how life works. And once that reference point gets yanked, the adjustment ain't rarely quick or easy. And when that structure disappears, something else happens. What alone actually means after divorce. After divorce, the word alone gets misunderstood a lot. It doesn't automatically mean isolation or sitting around doing nothing. More accurately, it reflects fewer fixed points in daily life. Routines that once ran on autopilot now need real intention. Access that once felt natural becomes scheduled. The shift rarely hits as one big moment. It settles in gradually and you notice it through repetition. Daily patterns are usually the first to change. The home environment no longer reflects those shared habits or sync schedules. Meals happen on different timelines. Downtime ain't structured the same way. Travel decisions follow new logic. Familiar spaces may feel different, not cause they're empty, but cause they don't serve the same shared purpose they once did. Emotionally, the adjustment is quieter than many expect. Life may stay demanding, especially with work, but staying busy doesn't replace continuity. There's a difference between being occupied and feeling connected, you know? The absence doesn't announce itself through major events. It shows up in small gaps, pauses between commitments, evenings that feel longer, moments that once filled themselves. This type of change doesn't arrive suddenly. It builds through repetition and recognition. Former assumptions stop applying. What once felt predictable now requires decision-making. Over time, that realization reshapes perspective and priorities. Stability starts looking different, defined less by shared routines and more by intentional structure. The process is subtle but persistent. Adjustment happens quietly, without dramatic signals, as new rhythms begin to replace old ones. Especially when kids are part of the equation. Parenting from the outside, looking in. After the divorce, parenting appears to have shifted from something organic to something more structured. According to court documents reported by People, both parents agreed to a defined co-parenting arrangement designed to prioritize consistency and stability for their children. This type of structure relies on coordination rather than spontaneity, replacing instinctive routines with planned schedules. When parenting time becomes organized in advance, everyday moments take on new weight. Small routines that once happened without thought, shared meals, school mornings, quiet downtime, are now experienced within specific windows. This doesn't reduce involvement or care, but it does change how presence feels. Being engaged becomes intentional rather than automatic. People's reporting confirms that the arrangement emphasizes cooperation rather than conflict. There is no indication of hostility, retaliation, or ongoing dispute. Instead, the focus remains on maintaining routine and minimizing disruption for the children involved. That approach often benefits long-term stability, even while requiring emotional adjustment from the parent adapting to the new framework. What's important here is restraint. Public records support structure, not spectacle. Beyond what's documented, speculation adds no clarity. What can reasonably be understood is adjustment, learning how to stay connected within agreed boundaries while redefining everyday expectations. This kind of shift is common in post-divorce parenting and typically unfolds quietly. Stability is built through consistency, not commentary. Quick pause. If you appreciate calm, fact-based stories without exaggeration, consider subscribing. Career success doesn't fill private silence. Professionally, this period continues to show momentum. Tours remain active, performances draw consistent crowds, and public visibility stays steady. From the outside, very little seems disrupted. Yet ongoing success doesn't automatically absorb personal change. Work can fill hours and provide structure, but it doesn't fully replace the emotional framework that once existed away from the stage. A full schedule keeps movement constant, but continuity can still feel reduced when familiar home routines have shifted. Touring often carries two effects at the same time. It provides direction, focus, and a clear sense of purpose. At the same time, it sharpens contrast. High-energy performances create intense engagement, surrounded by attention and noise. When those moments end, the quiet afterward can feel more pronounced than it once did. The rhythm becomes sharper, periods of activity followed by longer stretches of stillness, without the same personal anchors to bridge the two. This creates a paradox seen among many public figures. Achievements continue, commitments remain strong, and outward success stays visible. Yet private life may feel less defined. Being productive doesn't automatically produce grounding. Without established routines, waiting at the end of the day, even meaningful work can feel temporarily disconnected from daily life. None of this suggests instability or decline. It reflects adjustment. Professional progress continues forward, while private life enters a phase of reorganization. Priorities begin to shift subtly, away from external validation and toward internal balance. The changes are quieter, less visible, and more deliberate, which raises a difficult question. Identity after a long marriage ends. When a marriage lasts for decades, it shapes more than daily routines. It becomes part of identity. Over time, the role of spouse influences how decisions are made, how priorities are set, and how the future is planned. When that role comes to an end, the adjustment extends far beyond logistics. It prompts a deeper question. How does identity adapt when a defining role no longer exists? There's an important distinction between individual identity and shared identity. Individually, personal values, work, and habits remain. Shared identity, however, affects how life is navigated. Choices that were once made collaboratively now require independent recalibration. Even when transitions occur respectfully, that shift can feel disorienting simply because the framework has changed. Later life divorce often triggers a psychological reset, particularly for men. This reset isn't abrupt or visible. It unfolds in layers. Purpose has to be redefined without familiar reference points, and meaning is reconstructed gradually. Routines are rebuilt carefully rather than replaced overnight. This process tends to happen quietly, without public markers. At this stage, identity rebuilding isn't about reinvention or starting over. It's about reassessment, identifying what still fits, what no longer aligns, and what needs adjustment. The pace is slower, but the impact remains substantial. Without urgency, reflection deepens. Change becomes more deliberate. This kind of reset doesn't diminish identity, it refines it. Experience guides the process, even when circumstances feel unfamiliar. An age changes how that reset feels. Why 58 feels different than 38? At 58, perspective carries more weight than urgency. Life experience narrows the space for impulsive decisions while expanding reflection. Rebuilding no longer feels like a race to replace what was lost. Instead, attention shifts toward stability, sustainability, and long-term balance. The pressure to prove resilience publicly fades, replaced by a quieter focus on what actually works. There are fewer perceived do-overs at this stage, but also fewer illusions. Emotional fatigue can exist alongside clarity. People often understand their limits better, even as they become more selective with time and energy. The question changes from what's next to what's necessary. That shift influences how change is approached and how progress is measured. This phase of life typically favors quiet rebuilding, Adjustments are deliberate rather than dramatic. New routines are introduced carefully, tested over time, and refined without any spectacle. Priorities become clearer, not louder. Reduced momentum doesn't indicate retreat. It reflects discernment, man. Rebuilding at this age isn't about starting over or redefining identity from scratch. It's about reorganizing what already exists in a way that aligns with experience. Familiar strengths remain intact, while unnecessary strain is removed. Reflection shortens the learning curve, even when circumstances feel new. The result is a slower, more controlled transition. Progress continues, but without urgency or performance. That combination of restraint and self-awareness shapes how change unfolds. But not everyone views his situation the same way. Public sympathy, private assumptions. Public reaction to divorce often reduces complex transitions into simplified narratives. Online commentary frequently frames outcomes in terms of winning or losing, even when those labels don't reflect reality. These assumptions focus on visible conclusions rather than internal adjustment. According to AP News, the divorce was finalized through standard legal process, with no dramatic disputes or public confrontation. Court filings outline an agreement centered on structure and forward movement, not blame. That factual context contrasts sharply with the way public discussion often unfolds. Legal closure does not equal emotional resolution. While paperwork may suggest finality, personal restructuring follows a different timeline. AP News reporting reinforces that the outcome was orderly, but it doesn't, and can't, define how adjustment continues privately. Constant public analysis carries a cost. Silence is often interpreted as meaning something it doesn't. Routine changes are misread as signals. Ordinary decisions become symbolic. This environment encourages assumptions that replace understanding. What's often overlooked is that many transitions are intentionally quiet. Reduced visibility does not indicate withdrawal or decline. In many cases, it reflects a conscious decision to step away from public interpretation while personal balance is restored. Private recalibration rarely matches public expectation. It moves slower without announcements and without the need for narrative framing. Quick reminder: subscribe for grounded analysis that focuses on verified details, not headlines. The choice to stay silent. One of the defining features of this period has been restraint. There have been no extended interviews, no public breakdowns, and no visible attempts to shift responsibility or assign blame. In a media environment where personal events are often unpacked immediately and repeatedly, that absence of commentary is noticeable. Silence here doesn't suggest avoidance. It reflects control over what becomes public and what remains private. Not every ending benefits from explanation. Some decisions are handled quietly to limit long-term impact, especially when family stability remains a priority. By avoiding public narratives, attention stays on adjustment rather than conflict. What's left unsaid reduces the risk of misunderstanding and prevents personal changes from becoming ongoing discussion points. Silence is frequently misinterpreted as weakness, but it can also serve as a boundary. Choosing not to provide details protects space for recalibration without external pressure. It reduces the need to respond to speculation and allows routines to reform naturally, without constant reaction or correction. This approach doesn't deny emotion. It manages exposure. Personal transitions often unfold more effectively without an audience, particularly when the goal is balance instead of persuasion. Public explanations can invite judgment or distortion, while quiet decisions shorten the recovery period and reduce unnecessary friction. In many cases, silence becomes the most practical response. It keeps focus on forward movement rather than justification. Stability can return without commentary, and progress can happen without performance, which leads to the most misunderstood part. Alone doesn't mean broken. Solitude is often mistaken for loss or decline, especially when viewed from the outside. In reality, it can represent recalibration. Being alone doesn't signal damage or failure. More often, it reflects a conscious pause, time taken to reassess priorities, restore balance, and rebuild structure at a pace that can actually be sustained. Healing doesn't require public announcements or visible markers. Progress rarely shows up through updates or declarations. Instead, it appears in consistency. Routines become steadier, commitments are chosen more carefully, and unnecessary noise is reduced. This kind of adjustment tends to happen quietly, away from scrutiny, where focus can return without interruption. After disruption, stability rarely looks dramatic. There are no defining moments or sudden transformations. It's methodical and gradual. Familiar patterns are rebuilt with intention rather than habit. Days begin to feel predictable again, not because life has narrowed, but because it has been reorganized with purpose. This reframing is important because it changes how solitude is understood. Alone doesn't mean disconnected. It can mean selective about time, thoughtful about access, and deliberate about pace. Space becomes functional rather than empty. It allows reflection without pressure and movement without urgency. When viewed this way, solitude isn't something to be solved or escaped. It's part of the process of realignment. It creates the conditions where stability can return without performance or validation. And that reframes the title itself. What does life look like now? Based on publicly available information, life now appears structured around adjustment rather than constant visibility. Professional commitments continue as expected, but access is more selective. Public appearances are measured, schedules are controlled, and personal time seems more carefully protected. After major life changes, this kind of boundary setting is common and often intentional. This phase places greater emphasis on routine instead of reaction. Time is organized with predictability in mind rather than momentum alone. Decisions appear focused on maintaining balance rather than expanding commitments. The pace is steadier, with fewer unnecessary variables competing for attention. That shift doesn't suggest withdrawal, it suggests recalibration. Personal circles also tend to narrow during periods like this. Smaller, more intentional connections often replace broader social exposure. That change reduces noise and allows consistency to return. Stability becomes the priority, not visibility. Familiar patterns are rebuilt slowly, creating structure without excess pressure. Calm frequently follows disruption once boundaries are reinforced. That calm isn't empty or passive. It's deliberate and maintained through routine. Days move forward with purpose, but without the volatility that comes from overextension. This kind of organization allows professional life to continue while personal life regains footing. What this reflects is not absence, but control. Life doesn't stop, it reorganizes. The result is a quieter form of momentum, one that sustains progress without strain. And, finally, the truth behind the headline. The bottom line, the loneliness people don't see. This story was never about scandal or spectacle. It's about transition. Public success doesn't protect anyone from emotional resets, and visibility doesn't remove the need for private adjustment. Fame can amplify attention, but it doesn't rewrite how change is processed or how stability is rebuilt afterward. What often goes unnoticed is how quietly life reorganizes after a long chapter ends. From the outside, distance can look like detachment. In reality, it's often recalibration. Familiar roles dissolve, routines shift, and priorities realign without announcement. Some endings don't arrive with confrontation or closure. They settle gradually, reshaping daily life in ways that only the person living it can fully understand. Loneliness, in this sense, isn't necessarily isolation. It's the space where reflection happens. It's where identity adjusts, structure reforms, and balance slowly returns. These moments don't generate headlines, but they carry lasting impact. The most meaningful changes rarely unfold in public view. If you value grounded, factual storytelling that focuses on real transitions rather than exaggerated narratives, consider subscribing. This channel explores what happens beyond the headlines, where change is quieter, more complex, and often unseen.